Hi there, my name is Misha. I'm a Microsoft MVP and I'm a DevOps engineer who recently went freelance. And when you go freelance from a job, that also means that you have to hand in your company laptop. Now, my company laptop happens to be a very beefy MacBook Pro that I use for my work, but also for my content creation. And handing in that actually was quite of a problem. So, this also got me thinking about like what am I going to do? I will need to purchase a new laptop, but that also is going to eat a chunk of my buffer that I have to become a freelancer. So I've been using macOS daily for over a year now, and I was using it on the side before, and I really like the macOS experience. I have no complaints about it. But what if I could go back to my beloved desktop Linux? What if I can be the Chad again? And what if I can daily drive Arch Linux or maybe NixOS or do something cool like that? Like this was an opportunity where I could explore this possibility again. And so I did. I've been exploring this for the past 2 weeks, and I'm going to be sharing my findings with you. So can I do my work on a refurbished ThinkPad? That was the first question. I have a ThinkPad T480, which is refurbished, which I bought for 700 euros. A great machine, running desktop Linux that I use in my living room to be writing in the evenings and such like. And I love that machine, and I love working on that. So what if I could just switch to that? Well, that gives me the question, how embedded am I in the Apple ecosystem now that I'm using macOS and an iPhone and everything? And could I replace these apps of the Apple ecosystem with self-hosted alternatives? So those are the things that I wanted what I was set out to answer basically. So I'm an engineer, and what I need to do in a workflow to do my work and studies as a DevOps engineer, all I need is a browser, Obsidian, and a terminal with a Unix file system and Bash. So in my terminal, this is where I do most of my stuff. Like I do NeoVim. I technically don't even need Obsidian because I can interact with my second brain using NeoVim and my Zettelkasten. But I like to have Obsidian available for the navigation purposes, and Bash. I need to run containers, and that's all I need. I can run dev containers with all of the stuff installed in there. So a terminal with Unix file system and Bash. Those are the three things that I need to do my work. But I'm also a content creator. I am a YouTuber. I create courses, and that is also something that I need to be able to do on my machine. So this experiment does need to include this factor as well. I need to be able to create screen recordings. I need to be able to connect all of my camera and sound equipment that I use for these recordings. It needs to work without endless tinkering with drivers. I've done so much of that in my life, and I'm sick of that. And I have now in a point where I have my MacBook set up here, and my microphone is here. So I'll show you. So normally the microphone is in this position. And I move it down, I open OBS, and I'm ready to record. That's my recording setup that I have now, and that's what I also need to have. It needs to be a low threshold, because if there is work involved with setting up the recording, if I need to do a few dozen steps in order to be able to start recording, I know from experience that I'll do less of it. So the recording process needs to be as easy as possible. And after 3 years of constant iterations, I now finally have a workflow that works well. I now have the equipment that works well. When I have an idea, I can sit down, pull down my microphone, open OBS, and I can go. I also need to do light video editing. And with light, I say, I'm currently recording in 4K 60 FPS, so that's not necessarily light. But I'm you know my content. I'm not a very heavy editing focused content creator. I focus on the educational part of the content and my presence on camera rather than having to put in a lot of effort in scenes and transitions and all of that. So all I need to do is just trimming. And I also do live streaming. Not so much these days, but I might want to do more of that. And my system needs to be able to do live streaming. That's the point. So, like I said, I have a ThinkPad T480. It's an i7 processor and has 32 gigabytes of RAM. And my question was, like, will this be enough? Can I make do with a 700 euro ThinkPad? And I really wanted to be, because I love that machine. It's such a comfy experience to work on that thing. So I want to go back to desktop Linux. And this is a lot of nostalgia. I spent several years on desktop Linux. I built my whole Arch Linux system from the bottom up. And I really, really love that experience it taught me so much about Linux system administration, but also the feeling of being completely responsible with how your system is built and how it's maintained and how you set it up. I love it. And I wanted to go back to that. I miss that on macOS. macOS just works. It's beautiful. And I have no problems with it. But I also miss the sort of the tinkering, even though it is a time sink. But just this feeling that you're operating on a system that you built yourself, that is just something that I miss. So when considering going back to desktop Linux, I looked into Fedora. That was something that was suggested to me. Because, yeah, I might go straight back to Arch, but maybe try something new. And since I'm using it for work, I might want to consider something a bit more stable than Arch, Fedora, or even NixOS. That's also high on the list to try. But for this experiment, I thought, okay, well, let's not. I'm doing an experiment. I don't want to spend hours of tinkering. I just want to see if it works. So I just decided to go with Fedora, and I used Fedora Sway, a Fedora spin with Sway, the Sway window manager. I plugged in a USB, wrote the image, and it worked. It was fantastic. So a few things that I really needed to test, like these were the first things that I wanted to test. One of them was the AirPods. Like I use AirPods Pro. I wear these 14 hours a day these days. I listen to music, but I use it for blocking out sound, and it has become an association with working for me. The heavy feeling of the headphones on my head, even though if I'm not listening to something, they help me come into this extreme focus state that I operate on for so many hours a day. So the AirPods need to work. And the great thing with the AirPods and the Apple ecosystem is that I put them on, and if I'm on my MacBook, they'll switch to that. If I walk to my living room and I pull my phone out of my pocket to take a call, then boom, the call is on my AirPods, and there's just no switching. It is all seamless. It works so well. And of course, I know it's not going to work that well with Linux, but the AirPods need to work, and they need to be fairly easy to set up. So I can be okay with having to click connect to AirPods every time I wanted to connect to the machine, and then connect it to my iPhone manually. I'm okay with that for this experiment, but it should not be more toil than that. And finally, like I said, I need to be able to record my screen, do light video editing, and do streaming. So, what were my findings? The pairing went well with AirPods. The ThinkPad has Bluetooth, and it paired really nicely. It was not a problem at all to get them paired. I even tried it with, I was running i3 on Ubuntu before I switched to Fedora. And on there, I only had Bluetooth CTL. And I even did it with Bluetooth CTL. It went just fine. Then I switched to Fedora, and even in this Fedora Sway, there was this little Bluetooth utility which I could connect to the AirPods really quickly. And yes, I had to switch manually to my phone every time when I wanted to, but it wasn't that much. And if it saved me several €1,000 of not having to buy a MacBook straight away, I could live with that. Then I found that I could do my work just fine on the ThinkPad, editing code, browsing and running like my terminal-based workflow, but also I tried running VS Code. Just I wanted to know how it would be. I don't use it much, but sometimes I do to verify some syntax highlighting and such. Dev containers, and it all worked really well. I could run Rancher Desktop on there, taking 20 gigabytes of RAM, and I could spin up dev containers, dev pods, do everything in containers, and it worked super smooth. So no problems with that. It was very fast, very comfy, and I loved it. I love to actually work on desktop Linux again, and I had no problems. I didn't try. I didn't try to share my screen and do a Teams call. I didn't try to install Microsoft Teams. That's something that I need. So I didn't go into those things. Those tend to give a lot of problems on Linux, I know from experience. But I'll go into why in the next few slides, why I didn't even go there. But I did test the screen recording with OBS on 1080p with 60 frames per second, and that actually went fine. I couldn't do like huge container workloads, but I could record my screen while doing NeoVim editing or browsing and such like, and that went fine. So why didn't I switch to desktop Linux? Because spoiler alert, I didn't. The problem is my camera and my audio interface. Like I said in the slides, I don't want to be tinkering with this stuff all the time. And this is sadly what prevented me from going back to desktop Linux. So let's check it out. I use an Instalink 360 camera. It's an AI powered webcam. So if I move my head, it will actually track my face as I go. So that's nice for recording videos, but also for video calls. But it is 4K quality and 60 frames per second. So that's what I need for my content creation purposes. And it also helps with camera presence when doing consulting work and such like. I'm really happy with this camera. I don't use any other camera for my content creation. And it has good resolution and all of these good features. And yeah, I wanted this to work. I needed this to work. This camera has software. It's called a controller, which you can use to configure the thing, but also to steer the gimbal. Sometimes when I'm recording, I need to steer the gimbal when I do a full face recording. I don't rely on the face tracking because that sometimes is a bit iffy. So I need to able to control the gimbal, and that happens from the software. And as you may guess, the software is only for macOS and Windows. Sorry guys, I need this camera. I need it to work. I was going on Reddit, and some people had been hacking and talking against the API for a few years ago, the API of the camera. It can work theoretically, but already from reading those things, I knew this is not going to work as the way I want it to. This is not going to integrate well into OBS. This is going to be a problem. So I try to think in solutions, not problems. So it's probably a temporary situation, right? If I have my first freelance gig, I have some money coming in, then I can buy a better system. So, okay, temporarily, let's say these recordings only have my head in the screen here. I can go back to an older 1080 camera that's probably just going to work. Let's factor out the camera. Then I have my microphone. And this is a Shure SM7B. It's a podcast-grade microphone that costs a lot of money. This is what they use for professional podcasts, and I take the quality of my content seriously. And for that, I also need an audio interface. You can't just plug this into your computer. You need to have an audio interface. And the interface that I have is the Rodecaster Duo. Do we even see that here? Here. Rodecaster Duo. This is the one that I have. It's an audio interface where I can control the volume, but I can also control scene switching with buttons and such like. And I need this to work properly on my system in order to have proper audio ingestion. And again, you guessed it, this software is only for Mac and Windows. And to be honest with you, I was pissed off when I figured this out. Like I didn't like this at all. I didn't like it at all. Like, how hard could it be for these companies to just, if it's all for Mac OS, it can't be that problematic to port that to Linux, right? Well, they didn't, and I tried searching, but it was to no avail. So, unfortunately, I had to consider other options. Desktop Linux was just not going to do it. I'm sorry. I wanted to happen. I wanted it to happen, but I also need to create content. I need to serve my loyal subscribers. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the button down below. It really supports the channel. So I had to try Windows. I grew up on Windows. I've been using it for the majority of my life. I loved breaking away from it when I went to Linux, but yeah, maybe I had to go back. It's been a while. And you know what? I was surprised. I installed Windows 11 on my ThinkPad, and I was surprised. I like the UI. And again, I'm a Microsoft MVP, so in a way, it would make sense for me to at least start using Windows a little bit in my life. But yeah, I haven't been, and my first experience with Windows 11 was a good one, a good impression. I liked it. I can really see how well this works for normal or average people who just need a computer to work and who need to be able to quickly find things. I think Microsoft did a good thing on Windows 11. And then I also started this feeling of, yeah, it might be nice to go back to Windows. Like, what if I know enough about the terminal now that I could have my system running on Windows? That now that I know so much about containers, basically all I need is Windows to run a container for me, and I can have my Unix file system in there, right? Or use WSL, God forbid. But even if I needed to, maybe I could use WSL. At least all of the software is going to be compatible. At least my microphone will work. My camera will work. At least I can, and everything is going to be stable. I'll never have to fear that my system breaks because, like macOS, Windows just works. It works. So why didn't I? Well, there was a problem. Windows used a bunch of resources. I have 32 gigabytes of RAM on my ThinkPad. You would think that would be enough, but it was using 8 gigabytes of RAM just idling. Just idling. Open up a browser, boom, on 8 gigabytes plus. That hurt. And then that high resource usage caused my fan to start blowing constantly. And I'm sensitive to sounds, guys. I if there's noise around me, I have to block it off with my headphones, or if I'm working on a machine that starts blowing and making noise, like I had so many desktop PCs that had this fan in them, and literally when I started up RuneScape, it would go and I would hear that for hours and hours on end. And I didn't know any better. I didn't that was just part of the computer experience. But I've done my fair share of that, guys. I've done my fair share of this fan noise and fan blowing. I've experienced with my MacBook that that you can live without that. You can live without computer noise, and I don't want to go back. And I really wanted it to work because I even found this window manager, Glaze WM. So cool. Such a cool Windows project. Like, look at this. You can play the animation here. This is on Windows. Look at this. This is so freaking cool. You have the bar on top, and then you have a perfect Unix-like window management. This is so beautiful. And seriously, this project, Glaze WM, check it out if you are on Windows, because if I could go to Windows, I would use this. I would definitely use this. I could have this as my window manager. I could have a terminal with containers. I would be a happy camper on Windows these days, I think. I would be okay. I could create my content, everything would work. I think I would be okay with a container-based workflow. So what were my alternatives? What am I going to do? I could buy a new MacBook Pro, and I like I said, I'm going freelance, so I'm going to have a few months where I'm not going to have income because I'm finding a new gig. So I have saved up a buffer, and buying a new MacBook Pro, that's going to cut away a lot of that buffer that I have. And the thing is, when I went freelance, I had the opportunity to borrow a MacBook from a friend of mine. Turns out that my friend of mine needs it after all, and that's basically what got me into this situation in the first place. So that's one alternative, buy a MacBook Pro. Second, I could buy a Mac Mini. Even with the ThinkPad situation, I realized that a Mac Mini is probably going to be more than enough for my needs, for work, doing my work, and also for the content creation and video editing. I could be fine. Mac Mini is about half the price of a MacBook Pro, I think. It's still a lot of money, but it's doable. Unfortunately, the disadvantage is that I can't bring it with me to clients. So my MacBook, this beast of a thing that does everything I wanted to do, I just have to unplug my microphone from it, put it in my bag, and I have it with me, and I have the exact same machine and environment with me wherever I am. I don't go out working in cafes that like you see on YouTube, or I sometimes work in the park. I'm trying to do more of that these days. But for going to clients and working in the train and such like, it's just amazing to have a good mobile setup. Another alternative would be to build a new Windows desktop. Since I was a bit charmed by Windows again, that would also be an alternative. I don't game anymore, but having a beefy Windows desktop is definitely the thing to have if I would go back to gaming at some point. Or I could stop creating content. I could stop. I mean, yeah, I could stop. I could stop creating courses and just earn money from that. I could stop, but I enjoy it. I like creating content. I like sharing my knowledge with you guys. I like telling this story to you guys. I like the interaction I have with my audience. And even just stopping for a few months might be disastrous for the momentum on YouTube and the momentum in my own mind with creating all the courses and such like. So that was not much of an alternative either. So my conclusion, what was the end? I could buy my MacBook. I had anticipated that I had to hand it in. I did not anticipate the opportunity that I could buy the MacBook from the company. And they gave me a good price on it. They gave me such a good price that it was manageable with my buffer, with my budget that I have, but also that it is just worth it, that I don't have to clean this machine and transfer all of the config over and such like, which involves work, which involves a mental transition. So that money is also worth that. Some other conclusions were that I can work fine on a refurbished ThinkPad. If I wasn't a content creator, I would be fine on a ThinkPad. I would have no problem with just doing my work and being happy. But the sad thing is, if you're a content creator, you're stuck on Mac and Windows. That's it. If you want to create quality content with hardware that is compatible, you're stuck on Mac and Windows. I don't like it, but that's the way it is. I found Windows actually to be a good option, and I would consider going back to Windows if somehow I couldn't. But in the end, Mac is expensive, but it's so good. Yeah, it's just so good. It just works all the time. I have no problems. For video creation, it's the best solution. There's just no alternative. It is the best. Recording videos 4K 60 FPS is nothing for this, and I have a 16 gigabyte Kubernetes cluster running on this 32 gigabyte machine as I'm recording this. It doesn't break a sweat. There's a fan in there, but it is not even on, and it doesn't break a sweat, and editing is just a pleasure. There's seriously no delay ever. I just click around and everything plays instantly. It's just so smooth. And I might be picky, but these things are important. If you spend many hours doing these kinds of things, you want your experience to be good. And Mac is what provides me with a good experience with these kinds of tasks. So it has been a nice adventure. It was so nice to experiment with what I could do with desktop Linux these days. I could go back if I wasn't a content creator. I could go to Windows, which was also an interesting discovery. I could consider building a desktop, but in the end, I'm super glad that I get to keep my trusted MacBook Pro with my M2 chip in there. It works well, and I'm going to stick with this. So this was my story from macOS to desktop Linux and back again. I hope you enjoyed this and that this brought some value to you, and I hope to see you in the next video. Have a good day.